Before you scroll away, ask yourself one question: why did this appear on your screen at the exact moment you needed something to change? Maybe you were not even searching for a message like this tonight. Maybe you were just lying in bed with your phone resting against your chest, exhausted from another long day that felt strangely empty. Maybe the room around you is quiet right now except for the soft hum of a fan or the glow from a television playing somewhere in the background. And maybe nobody around you knows how tired you really are. Not physically tired. A deeper kind of tired. The kind that builds slowly after weeks of pretending you are okay. The kind that comes from waiting for things to finally make sense. Because lately it feels like something has been off in your life, doesn't it? You keep trying to move forward, but every time you think something good is finally about to happen, it slips away at the last second. Plans change. People grow distant. Conversations feel colder than they used to. Even the things that once made you excited barely hold your attention anymore. And the strange part is, you cannot fully explain why you feel this way. You wake up in the morning hoping today will feel different, but by the end of the day you are back in the same silence again. You check your phone more than you used to, even when you already know there are no new messages waiting. You replay old memories while staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering if you missed something important somewhere along the way. Wondering if somehow life quietly moved on without you noticing. But what if this season of your life is not happening by accident? What if the delays, the confusion, and even the silence are connected to something bigger that you cannot fully see yet? Because sometimes the moments that feel the most random are actually the moments that carry the deepest meaning. Think about how many videos, messages, and distractions pass in front of your eyes every single day. Yet somehow this one made you stop. Something inside you paused for a second. Not because of luck. Not because of an algorithm. But because deep down, part of you has already been sensing that something is changing beneath the surface. Maybe that feeling started weeks ago. Maybe it began the night you sat alone in your car after work without turning the engine on for almost 20 minutes because going home felt emotionally heavier than staying parked in silence. Or maybe it started the moment you realized you had been carrying everything alone for too long. The truth is, you have been trying so hard to hold yourself together while quietly feeling like life has been slipping through your hands. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, you are beginning to realize that maybe the silence around you was never empty at all. The hardest part was not the waiting. It was watching yourself slowly become someone you barely recognized while you waited. Somewhere along the way, you stopped talking about your dreams the way you used to. You stopped expecting good news when your phone lit up. You started preparing yourself for disappointment before anything even happened because it felt safer that way. And nobody really noticed the shift except you. To everyone else, you still looked fine. You still showed up to work. You still answered messages with polite little responses. You still smiled when people asked how you were doing. But deep down, something inside you had become tired of hoping for things that never seemed to arrive. There were moments recently when you almost convinced yourself that this was just adulthood, that maybe life was supposed to feel this heavy all the time. But late at night, when everything became quiet, you could feel another truth underneath it all. A strange restlessness. Like part of your spirit kept trying to wake you up to something your mind could not fully understand yet. You felt it in small moments. Standing in the kitchen staring out the window while the microwave clock blinked 11:11. Sitting in traffic after a long day while a random memory from years ago suddenly came rushing back for no reason at all. Waking up at 3 in the morning with your heart pounding even though nothing bad had happened. These moments seemed small, almost meaningless, but they stayed with you longer than they should have. And the more you tried to ignore them, the more they quietly returned. What makes this harder is that part of you still blames yourself for where you are now. You replay old decisions in your mind wondering if you ruined something important without realizing it. You think about opportunities you missed, relationships that slowly faded, conversations you wish had gone differently. Sometimes you wonder if your life would feel completely different right now if you had just made one better choice somewhere along the line. But what if you have been looking at your story the wrong way this entire time? What if not every closed door was a punishment? What if some things had to fall apart before they pulled you into a life that would have slowly drained everything good out of you? Because the truth is, there were moments you begged for things that would not have been good for your future self. There were people you wanted to hold onto who would have slowly convinced you to shrink yourself just to keep them comfortable. There were places you desperately wanted to go that would have left you emotionally empty within months. You could not see it then because all you could feel was the rejection. But rejection and protection can look almost identical in the moment they happen. That is why this season has confused you so deeply. You thought silence meant abandonment. You thought delays meant you were forgotten. But what if something unseen has been quietly redirecting your life this entire time, even while you believed nothing was happening at all? There is something else you have not fully admitted to yourself yet. A part of you has slowly started losing trust in your own instincts. Not because you are weak, but because too many things happened that made you question what you felt in your heart. You ignored certain feelings because you wanted people to stay. You forced yourself to keep going in situations that quietly drained you because you thought giving up meant failure. And after enough disappointment, you stopped listening to that quiet inner voice altogether. But recently, something has been changing. It is subtle, almost impossible to explain, but you can feel it. Certain conversations suddenly leave you exhausted in ways they never did before. Certain places no longer feel right even though nothing outwardly changed. You have started craving silence more than noise. You spend more time thinking about meaning, purpose, and direction than you used to. And maybe for the first time in years, you are beginning to realize how emotionally overwhelmed you have actually been. There were nights when you sat on the edge of your bed staring at the floor, not even crying anymore because you were too emotionally numb to release anything. Nights when you kept refreshing your email hoping for good news that never came. Mornings when your alarm went off and you instantly felt disappointment before your feet even touched the ground. You kept telling yourself to stay positive, but deep down you were exhausted from carrying invisible weight nobody else could see. The strange thing is, even during your lowest moments, there were still small interruptions that kept appearing in your life. Tiny moments that did not make sense at first. Like hearing the exact words you needed from a stranger without them realizing it. Or driving home after a difficult day and suddenly feeling an unexpected calm wash over you for no clear reason. Or finding yourself pausing in complete silence because something inside you felt strangely pulled to stop and reflect. Those moments mattered more than you realized. Because while you thought your life was falling apart, something deeper was quietly trying to guide your attention. Not through fear. Not through pressure. But through awareness. And maybe that is why this season has felt so emotionally confusing. One half of you feels tired enough to give up, while another part refuses to fully let go. You keep trying to convince yourself that nothing meaningful is ahead, yet something inside you still searches for signs that your story is not over yet. That inner conflict has become exhausting, has it not? Wanting to believe things can change while also being afraid to hope too much again. Wanting peace while secretly fearing disappointment. Wanting answers while feeling terrified of what those answers might require you to leave behind. But what if this tension inside you is not proof that you are broken? What if it is proof that something old inside you is slowly ending? Because sometimes before a new season begins, life becomes painfully quiet. Old distractions stop working. Empty routines become unbearable. And the things that once kept your mind busy no longer numb the deeper questions rising inside you. You thought you were losing direction, but what if you were actually being separated from a version of yourself that could no longer carry you where you were meant to go next? You have been carrying a question inside you that you rarely say out loud. What if nothing ever changes? That thought has followed you into quiet moments more often than you admit. It slips into your mind while standing in line at the grocery store, while folding laundry in silence, while driving familiar roads that somehow feel emptier than they used to. You keep moving through your routines because you have to, but there are moments when it feels like your soul has been standing still for a very long time. And the hardest part is that nobody around you fully understands what this season has felt like for you internally. They see the outside version of you. The responsible version. The version that still shows up on time, still says everything is fine, still laughs at the right moments. But they do not see how many nights you have spent mentally replaying your life trying to figure out where the disconnect began. They do not see the moments when you sit alone in your apartment with only the kitchen light on, feeling this strange ache in your chest because something about your life no longer feels aligned. And lately, the feeling has been getting stronger. You notice it when certain people talk and your spirit immediately feels heavy. You notice it when old habits that once distracted you now leave you feeling emptier afterward. You notice it when you instinctively pull away from noise because part of you has become desperate for clarity. It is almost as if your soul has been trying to protect itself from things your mind still wants to hold onto. That is why some relationships have started changing without warning. That is why certain conversations suddenly feel exhausting instead of comforting. That is why some opportunities that once seemed perfect now feel strangely wrong deep inside. At first you thought you were becoming too sensitive. You wondered if stress was making you overthink everything. But what if your awareness is increasing because you are finally beginning to see what was draining you all along? Think about the people who left your life unexpectedly. At the time it felt personal. It felt painful. You wondered what you did wrong. But looking back honestly, how many times were you shrinking yourself just to keep those connections alive? How many times did you ignore your own exhaustion because you were afraid of disappointing others? There were situations where you kept asking for reassurance from people who were emotionally unavailable from the very beginning. There were doors you desperately wanted open that would have trapped you in environments where you slowly would have lost yourself completely. You could not see that then because all you felt was loss. But now, little by little, something deeper is becoming clear. The discomfort you feel lately is not random confusion. It is separation. Separation from patterns that kept you emotionally stuck. Separation from distractions that kept you disconnected from yourself. Separation from environments where you survived but never truly felt alive. And even though this process feels lonely, part of you already knows you cannot return to the version of yourself that existed before this awakening began. There is a reason this season has felt heavier right before things were supposed to get better. You thought once certain people left, once certain doors closed, once enough time passed, the pressure inside you would finally disappear. But instead, it almost became more intense. The silence grew louder. The uncertainty became harder to ignore. And some days it felt like life was testing how much disappointment your heart could carry before completely shutting down. You tried distracting yourself from it at first. You stayed busy. You filled your calendar. You scrolled longer at night just to avoid sitting alone with your thoughts. But eventually none of it worked anymore. Because the deeper issue was never your schedule. It was the ache of feeling emotionally disconnected from the life you thought you would have by now. There are moments recently when you have looked around and quietly wondered why everything seems to be moving forward for everyone else while your own life feels paused in place. You see other people finding relationships, opportunities, direction, stability, while you are still trying to understand why your own path has felt so delayed. And if you are honest, there have been nights when bitterness almost started growing inside you because of it. Nights when you questioned whether all your patience had actually mattered at all. But what if this pressure is exposing something important before the next chapter begins? Because pressure has a way of revealing what exhaustion tries to hide. It reveals where you have been abandoning yourself just to feel accepted. It reveals where fear has been controlling your decisions. It reveals how much of your peace you have sacrificed trying to force things that were never truly aligned for you in the first place. Think about how many times you stayed attached to situations long after your spirit already knew they were draining you. Think about how many signs you ignored because loneliness made you afraid to let go. Deep down, you sensed when certain people only reached for you when it benefited them. You sensed when environments were making you emotionally smaller. You sensed when opportunities looked impressive on the outside but felt wrong in your chest the moment you imagined living inside them every day. But you kept overriding those feelings because you were terrified that walking away meant losing your only chance. And that fear exhausted you more than anything else ever could. There was one night recently when you sat alone in complete silence after another disappointing day, too emotionally drained even to turn the television on. Your phone battery was almost dead beside you on the couch, unread notifications glowing faintly across the screen, and for the first time in a long time you stopped trying to solve your entire future. You just sat there breathing slowly in the quiet. And in that moment something strange happened. The panic eased for a few seconds. Not because your problems disappeared, but because deep inside you finally realized how tired you were from fighting to control every outcome. That moment mattered more than you know. Because what is changing inside you right now is not only your circumstances. It is your attachment to the things that were never bringing you peace to begin with. And maybe the reason this season has felt so uncomfortable is because your spirit can no longer tolerate pretending that certain paths were meant for you when deep down they never truly were. What you are feeling right now is not only emotional exhaustion. It is the uncomfortable realization that you cannot keep living the same way you used to. That truth has been slowly rising to the surface whether you wanted to face it or not. You notice it in the quiet moments most. The old distractions are not working anymore. The endless scrolling, the constant noise, the forced positivity, the pretending that everything is fine just so nobody asks questions you are too tired to answer. None of it reaches the deeper ache anymore. And maybe that scares you because for a long time those distractions helped you survive. They helped you avoid sitting alone with the thoughts you were afraid to hear clearly. But lately, silence has become unavoidable. Not empty silence. Revealing silence. The kind that forces hidden emotions into the open. You have started noticing patterns you ignored before. The way your body tenses around certain people. The way some conversations leave you drained for hours afterward. The way your spirit instantly feels lighter in places where there is honesty, calm, and genuine peace. Your awareness is changing, and that shift has made this season feel strangely isolating. Because the more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to keep participating in things that no longer feel real to you. There was a time when you could ignore your intuition and keep moving anyway. You could force yourself to stay connected to situations that made you unhappy because at least they felt familiar. But now even familiarity feels exhausting when it costs your peace. That is why you have been pulling inward lately without fully understanding why. Not because you hate people. Not because you want to disappear from the world. But because some part of you has been trying to recover from years of emotional overstimulation, disappointment, and internal pressure. You have spent so much time trying to become what everyone else needed you to be that you barely stopped to ask yourself what your own soul actually needed. And the truth is, your soul has been exhausted for a long time. Exhausted from overthinking every decision. Exhausted from carrying invisible fears nobody else could see. Exhausted from waiting for validation from people who were too distracted to truly understand your heart. There was a moment recently when you realized how disconnected you had become from yourself. Maybe it happened while driving home in complete silence instead of turning music on like you normally would. Maybe it happened while standing under the shower too mentally overwhelmed to even think clearly. Or maybe it happened one night when you looked at your reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the heaviness in your own eyes. That moment was not weakness. It was awareness. Because something inside you is finally becoming honest about how much pain you have been quietly carrying. But here is what you have not realized yet. The loneliness you feel right now is not only about losing people or opportunities. Part of the loneliness comes from outgrowing environments, habits, and identities that no longer fit who you are becoming. And growth like that almost always feels lonely before it starts making sense. That is why this season has felt so strange. One part of your life is ending emotionally before the next part has fully arrived. You are standing in between versions of yourself now. And even though that space feels uncertain, something deep inside you already knows you cannot go back to who you were before all of this started changing you. This is the part most people never talk about. The moment when you realize you cannot keep pretending. Your old life still fits you, but you also cannot clearly see what comes next. That space in between can feel terrifying because nothing feels solid there. The routines that once comforted you now feel hollow. The people you used to lean on no longer understand the version of you that is emerging. Even your own thoughts feel unfamiliar some days. And because there is no clear roadmap for this kind of inner change, you have started wondering if something is wrong with you. But what if this confusion is actually proof that something inside you is waking up? Think about how different you have become compared to a year ago. The things you tolerate now are different. The things you crave are different. You no longer want constant noise around you all the time. You no longer feel impressed by things that only look good on the surface. You have become more sensitive to energy, honesty, and intention without fully understanding why. And that shift has made certain environments almost unbearable for your spirit. There are moments lately when you walk into a crowded room and somehow feel lonelier than when you are physically alone. Moments when people are talking all around you, yet internally you feel disconnected from everything being said. It is not because you think you are better than anyone. It is because your soul has started searching for something deeper than distraction. But the deeper your awareness grows, the more difficult it becomes to ignore what is no longer aligned. That is why your emotional tension has been increasing instead of fading. You thought clarity would immediately bring peace, but first it exposed everything that was quietly draining you beneath the surface. Every forced connection. Every situation where you abandoned your own needs. Every place where you stayed out of fear instead of genuine peace. That realization hurts because it forces you to confront how long you have survived in emotional survival mode without calling it that. There was a night recently when you almost gave up trying to understand any of this. You were exhausted mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Your phone sat face down on the bed while rain tapped softly against the window, and for a few minutes you seriously considered disconnecting from everyone completely because carrying all this confusion felt too heavy. But then something unexpected happened. In the middle of all that exhaustion, a strange thought crossed your mind. What if none of this is random? What if every uncomfortable shift happening inside you is preparing you to finally stop betraying yourself just to keep other people comfortable? That thought stayed with you because deep down you knew there was truth inside it. You have spent years trying to earn peace through external things. Through achievement. Through approval. Through relationships. Through staying useful to everyone around you. But peace never fully stayed, did it? Because real peace cannot grow where your spirit constantly feels ignored. And maybe that is the deeper reason life has been stripping certain things away lately. Not to punish you. Not to isolate you forever. But to separate you from patterns that were quietly disconnecting you from who you were always meant to become. Right now it still feels messy. It still feels uncertain. But somewhere beneath all the confusion, your spirit already senses that this chapter of your life is leading towards something real for the very first time in a long while. What if the delay was never the punishment you thought it was? What if the silence that frustrated you, the doors that stayed closed, the plans that fell apart at the last second were actually the very things protecting your future from paths that would have slowly destroyed your peace? Sit with that for a moment. Because deep down, you already know there were things you once begged for that would have broken you emotionally if they had worked out the way you wanted. You just could not see it at the time. You only saw the rejection. You only felt abandoned. But now, looking back honestly, certain memories feel different, do they not? Think about the relationship you fought so hard to keep alive even while it was draining the life out of you emotionally. Think about the opportunity you thought was perfect until it collapsed unexpectedly. Think about the moments when you felt humiliated by silence. Because nobody called back, nobody chose you, nobody stayed. At the time, those moments felt personal. They felt like proof that you were not enough. But what if they were actually interruptions? What if life was pulling you away before you tied your entire future to things that were never aligned with your spirit in the first place? There was a version of you that almost disappeared trying to force what was never meant to stay. A version of you that would have sacrificed your peace, your identity, your emotional well-being just to avoid being alone. And maybe that is the real reason this season became so painful. Because the delays forced you to finally sit still long enough to confront truths you spent years avoiding. Truths about how much validation controlled your decisions. Truths about how often you ignored your intuition because loneliness made you desperate for connection. Truths about how many times you accepted emotional exhaustion and called it love, loyalty, or ambition. But now something inside you is waking up too strongly to keep pretending anymore. That is why the old distractions stopped working. That is why your spirit kept pulling inward. That is why the silence became impossible to ignore. Not because you were abandoned, but because something deeper was trying to separate you from the noise before you lost yourself completely inside it. There was a moment recently when this truth almost reached you clearly. You were driving late at night with no destination in mind, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel while streetlights blurred across the windshield. Your mind was replaying every disappointment from the past few years, every delay, every unanswered question, every closed door. And suddenly a thought came over you so quietly you almost missed it. What if none of those things were rejections at all? What if they were protection disguised as disappointment? That thought unsettled you because part of you instantly recognized the truth inside it. The silence was not empty. The waiting was not pointless. Even the loneliness had been changing you in ways you could not fully understand yet. Because during this season you stopped chasing things that only looked good from the outside. You became more honest about what your soul actually needed. You became more aware of what peace truly feels like. And maybe for the first time in your life, you are beginning to realize that not getting what you wanted immediately may have been the greatest hidden mercy of all. Once you begin seeing your past through this new perspective, certain memories become impossible to ignore. Situations that once looked like failure suddenly reveal themselves differently. You start realizing how many times your life quietly redirected you when you were moments away from settling for less than you deserved emotionally. The frightening part is that you almost stayed in those situations permanently because you thought survival was the same thing as peace. But survival and peace are not the same at all. Survival keeps you exhausted. Peace allows you to breathe again. And lately, your spirit has been trying to show you the difference. That is why you have felt so emotionally sensitive these past few months. You are no longer able to comfortably tolerate environments that force you to betray yourself internally. Even your body has started reacting differently. You feel drained faster around negativity. Your chest tightens when something feels dishonest. Your mind becomes restless when you try forcing yourself toward paths that no longer align with who you are becoming. At first you thought anxiety was controlling you. But what if your spirit has simply become too awake to continue ignoring what your soul has known all along? Think about the opportunities you cried over losing. There was one in particular that felt devastating when it fell apart. You remember checking your email over and over hoping things would somehow change. You imagined your whole future connected to that one outcome. But months later, when you learned what that environment was truly like behind the scenes, something inside you quietly whispered, that could have destroyed your peace. And suddenly the rejection did not feel cruel anymore. It felt protective. The same thing happened with certain people too. At the time you thought their distance meant you were not valuable enough to stay close to. But looking back honestly, many of those connections only survived when you abandoned your own emotional needs to keep them alive. You carried conversations. You carried understanding. You carried loyalty. And the moment you stopped overextending yourself, the connection faded because it was never being held equally in the first place. That realization hurt deeply because it forced you to confront how often you confused emotional exhaustion with love. But even through all this painful clarity, something unexpected has started happening inside you recently. Small moments of peace have begun appearing in places where panic used to live. Not constantly. Not perfectly. But enough for you to notice. A quiet calm while sitting alone with coffee early in the morning. A feeling of relief after finally saying no to something that once terrified you to walk away from. A strange sense of stillness while driving home beneath the city lights at night. Those moments matter because they are evidence that your spirit is no longer fighting reality the way it used to. For years you believed peace would arrive when everything around you finally changed. But now you are beginning to understand something deeper. Real peace starts the moment you stop trying to force yourself into places, relationships, and futures that require you to betray your own inner truth. And maybe that is why this entire season unfolded the way it did. Not to destroy your hope, but to remove every false version of stability you were building your identity around. Because what is waiting ahead for you cannot be built on fear, desperation, or emotional self-abandonment anymore. It has to be built on something real this time. And now you are beginning to understand something that changes everything. The real sign was never the coincidence that caught your attention for a few moments. The real sign has been the transformation quietly happening inside you this entire time. It has been there in every sleepless night that forced you to confront your truth. In every uncomfortable silence where distractions stopped working. In every moment you felt emotionally pulled away from things that no longer match the person you are becoming. That was the real shift beginning. Not outside you. Inside you. You spent so long searching for answers in external things that you almost missed what your own spirit has been trying to reveal. Because deep down, you already knew certain chapters of your life were ending emotionally long before they ended physically. You felt it when conversations became forced. You felt it when certain places left you feeling empty instead of inspired. You felt it when your soul started craving honesty more than comfort. But part of you resisted those feelings because letting go of familiar things felt terrifying. Familiar pain still feels safer than unknown peace to a heart that has spent years surviving disappointment. That is why this season stretched you so deeply. It forced you into stillness long enough to recognize how disconnected you had become from yourself. There was a morning recently when you woke up earlier than usual before the sun had fully risen. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of rain outside the window. For once you did not immediately grab your phone. You just sat there breathing slowly in the dim light, feeling the strange calm that sometimes appears after emotional exhaustion finally burns itself out. And in that silence, something became clear. You realized how much of your life had been built around trying to avoid rejection, avoid loneliness, avoid uncertainty. Almost every major decision carried the hidden fear of being left behind, forgotten, or unseen. But now, after everything that has happened, something inside you no longer wants to live from fear like that anymore. That realization did not arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly. But quiet truths are often the ones that change people the most. Because once your spirit recognizes what peace actually feels like, it becomes impossible to fully return to environments built on anxiety, emotional chasing, and constant inner conflict. That is why your old life has felt harder to fit into lately. Your soul has already begun moving ahead emotionally before your external circumstances fully catch up. And this is the part many people misunderstand when they go through seasons like this. They think everything is falling apart because they cannot see immediate results. But often the deepest transformations happen invisibly first. Long before opportunities change. Long before relationships shift. Long before the future becomes clear. The internal foundation changes first. The way you see yourself changes first. The way you tolerate emotional chaos changes first. The way you listen to your intuition changes first. And maybe that is why so much has felt uncertain lately. Because your spirit has been rebuilding itself from the inside out while your mind kept demanding visible proof that something meaningful was happening. But the proof has been there all along. In your increased awareness. In your emotional honesty. In your growing inability to settle for things that cost your peace. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you are finally beginning to trust that what is meant for you will never require you to abandon yourself in order to receive it. The strange thing about awakening is that it rarely feels beautiful while it is happening. Most of the time it feels confusing, lonely, and deeply uncomfortable because it asks you to release versions of yourself you spent years building your identity around. And right now, that is exactly where you are. You are grieving parts of yourself that no longer fit who you are becoming. The people-pleasing version. The version that accepted emotional breadcrumbs because being chosen felt better than being alone. The version that stayed quiet to avoid conflict even when your spirit was screaming for honesty. You carried those versions of yourself for so long that letting them go almost feels like losing pieces of your own identity. But deep inside, you already know you cannot keep living that way anymore. Something inside you has become too aware now. Too honest. Too emotionally awake to comfortably return to the patterns that once kept you emotionally asleep. That is why your solitude has started feeling different lately. Not easy, but meaningful. There are moments now when you sit alone without immediately trying to escape yourself. Moments when the silence no longer feels like punishment. Moments when you begin noticing how peaceful life becomes when you stop forcing yourself to stay connected to things that drain your spirit. A few months ago, being alone terrified you because your mind immediately filled the silence with fear. Fear that you were behind in life. Fear that everyone else had figured things out except you. Fear that maybe nothing meaningful was ever going to happen for you at all. But now, slowly, something is shifting. You are beginning to realize that some of your deepest suffering came from comparing your timeline to people whose paths were never meant to look like yours in the first place. You were trying to measure your worth through external milestones while your spirit was trying to guide you toward internal transformation. That is why things had to slow down. That is why distractions stopped satisfying you. Because your soul was trying to pull your attention inward before you built your future around things that looked successful but felt empty. There was a moment recently when you noticed this change clearly. You were out in public surrounded by people, noise, movement, conversations, yet instead of feeling pressure to perform or fit in, you suddenly felt detached from all the pretending. Not judgmental. Just awake. You noticed how many people were desperately distracting themselves from their own inner emptiness. Constant noise. Constant validation seeking. Constant chasing. And for the first time, you did not envy it anymore. You simply felt grateful that something inside you had finally slowed down enough to seek something deeper than temporary approval. That realization changed you more than you expected. Because now you understand that this entire season was never about losing your way. It was about finding yourself underneath all the pressure, fear, and emotional conditioning that taught you to ignore your own spirit. The signs were never meant to scare you. The silence was never meant to destroy you. Even the loneliness carried purpose because it separated you from voices that kept pulling you away from your truth. And although the future still feels uncertain sometimes, you are no longer standing in that uncertainty the same way you used to. There is a quiet strength forming inside you now. Not loud confidence. Not fake positivity. Something deeper. The kind of inner calm that only appears after someone survives enough disappointment to finally stop building their identity around what other people choose, reject, approve, or understand. You do not need to have every answer tonight. That is one of the deepest truths this season has been trying to teach you. For so long you believed peace would only come once everything finally made sense, once every loose end was tied together, once the future became clear enough for your mind to stop worrying. But life does not always heal people through certainty. Sometimes it heals them by teaching them how to breathe inside uncertainty without losing themselves to fear. And that is exactly what has been happening to you little by little. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But quietly, steadily, beneath the surface. There are still moments when anxiety tries to pull you backward into old thought patterns. Moments when you wonder if you are making mistakes by letting go of certain people, certain expectations, certain timelines you once clung to so tightly. But now those fears no longer control you the same way they used to. Because something inside you has started recognizing that forcing yourself to remain where your spirit feels heavy is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment. And you have finally become tired of abandoning yourself just to maintain temporary comfort. That realization has changed the way you move through life now. You pause more. You listen to yourself more carefully. You notice how your energy shifts around people and environments instead of instantly dismissing your intuition. And for the first time in years, you are beginning to trust the quiet voice inside you again. Not the fearful voice. Not the overthinking voice. The deeper one. The calm one that speaks softly beneath all the noise. There was a moment recently when you felt this change clearly. Maybe nobody else would have noticed it, but you did. You were sitting alone after a long day, phone untouched beside you, no television playing in the background, no distractions filling the silence. Just stillness. And instead of panic rising the way it once did, you felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because your life suddenly became perfect. Not because every question disappeared. But because for the first time in a long while, you stopped fighting yourself internally. You allowed yourself to simply exist without trying to solve your entire future in one night. That moment mattered more than you realize. Because healing often begins quietly like that. Not through dramatic breakthroughs. Not through instant answers. But through small moments where your nervous system finally realizes it no longer has to live in constant survival mode. And maybe that is the hidden purpose behind everything you have experienced lately. The delays slowed you down enough to hear yourself again. The loneliness separated you from voices that drowned out your inner truth. The silence forced you to confront parts of yourself you had neglected for years. None of it felt comfortable while it was happening. But comfort was never the thing your soul truly needed most. Your soul needed honesty. Peace. Alignment. Space to finally become who you were beneath all the pressure to perform, please, and prove your worth. That is why your perspective has changed so much recently. You no longer crave constant validation the way you once did. You no longer feel desperate to chase things that require you to betray your own peace. Instead, something softer has started growing inside you. A quiet understanding that what belongs in your life will arrive without demanding you destroy yourself to hold onto it. And even though you still do not know exactly what comes next, your spirit already senses that you are no longer lost the way you once believed you were. Maybe this entire journey was never about becoming someone new. Maybe it was about finally returning to the person you were before fear, disappointment, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion convinced you to abandon yourself. Because if you think about it honestly, the deepest pain you carried was never only about what happened around you. It came from how long you kept ignoring your own spirit while trying to survive everything life placed on your shoulders. You kept searching for signs that you were still being guided, still being seen, still moving towards something meaningful. But all along, the evidence was quietly unfolding inside you through every shift in awareness, every uncomfortable realization, every moment your soul refused to settle for emotional emptiness anymore. And now, after everything you have walked through, something feels different. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just clearer. You no longer feel the same desperation to force outcomes the way you once did. You no longer feel drawn toward chasing people who only value you when you are overextending yourself emotionally. You no longer feel willing to sacrifice your peace just to avoid temporary loneliness. That change did not happen overnight. It was built slowly through every difficult moment that taught you what your spirit could no longer tolerate. There was a time when silence terrified you because it forced you to sit with thoughts and emotions you spent years trying to outrun. But now, silence has become something else entirely. A place where clarity finally has room to reach you. A place where your nervous system can rest. A place where you can hear your own intuition without the constant noise of outside expectations drowning it out. And perhaps that is the greatest shift of all. You are no longer living every moment trying to prove your worth to people who were never responsible for defining it in the first place. You are beginning to understand that your value was never dependent on who stayed, who left, who chose you, or who failed to recognize your heart. Your value existed long before any disappointment ever touched your life. That truth changes the way you move through the world. Because once someone truly understands that internally, fear slowly starts losing its control over them. The fear of rejection. The fear of missing out. The fear of being alone. The fear that nothing meaningful is waiting ahead. Those fears begin loosening their grip because your spirit finally realizes peace cannot be found through chasing external certainty forever. Peace begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself trying to earn what was never meant to require suffering to receive. And maybe that is why you were guided into this season of stillness in the first place. Not to punish you. Not to isolate you forever. But to help you rediscover the quiet strength that was buried underneath years of emotional noise and survival. Tonight, as you sit here reflecting on everything your heart has carried, take a moment to notice something important. Despite all the confusion, all the waiting, all the unanswered questions, you are still here. Still searching. Still healing. Still becoming. And maybe that alone is proof that something greater has been gently leading you forward this entire time, even during the moments you were most convinced you had been left behind.